Think about the last time a major news alert hit your phone. That sudden jolt in your chest, the feeling that the world just changed. For thousands of years, that feeling was private. Information moved slowly. It had a kind of viscosity to it that kept us immersed in more banal things. But today, that thickness is gone. We have built a world where billions of people all have that same jolt at the exact same second. We've created a global attention network, and the apps in our pockets are the ones setting the pace. This is more than just being online, though. When 2 billion people flinch together, that energy doesn't just disappear. In physics, energy doesn't just vanish. That emotional energy becomes a physical force. Today, we're looking at the proof that our collective focus has become a weapon. I want you to picture this. You're sitting on your couch. The room is totally quiet.
Just you and your phone.
Right. You're holding your phone, and you are just scrolling. You're swiping through this endless, frictionless feed of breaking news.
Alert after alert.
A disaster in one hemisphere, a geopolitical crisis in another. And somewhere in the very back of your mind, a tiny, quiet voice is asking, is it just me? Or is everything actually spinning out of control?
I can tell you right now, it is not just you.
Thank God.
Yeah. That profound disorientation you're feeling, it isn't merely psychological fatigue. The answer to why the world feels like it's vibrating at a totally different frequency is actually hidden in the physical architecture of reality itself.
And that is what we're getting into today.
Yes. Today, we aren't just looking at the internet or human psychology. We are looking at a stack of incredibly paradigm-shifting source material that suggests human consciousness is literally reshaping the physical geometry of the Earth. And the time frame for this mechanism is vanishingly small. Today's deep dive is fundamentally about a 140 millisecond window.
Just 140 milliseconds.
Right. It is a biological threshold that literally dictates whether our planet maintains its geophysical stability or whether it goes into a literal physical planetary seizure.
The stakes here are just immense. Stick with us because we are going to look at the startling data from random number generators on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Data which seemed to map an anomaly in the fabric of time itself.
We are also going to decode the bizarre, recurring numerological architecture of the number 11 in global catastrophes.
That part completely blew my mind.
By the time we reach the end of this deep dive, the way you look at a digital clock and the physical way you process a breaking news alert will completely change because you are the observer and the Earth is actively listening.
I am entirely locked in. Let's start with the physical data, the anchor point for this entire investigation. Take us to March 11th, 2011. Because the data from that day completely broke my understanding of planetary physics when I first read our research.
It's staggering. So March 11, 2011. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, a catastrophic era-defining event. It registered as a 9.0 on the moment magnitude scale. Now, the sheer kinetic force of that event is almost incomprehensible to the human mind.
Yeah.
But what is truly mind-bending is what happened to the Earth as a celestial body in the aftermath. We have to look at the official NASA telemetry here. The physical impact of the Pacific and North American tectonic plates snapping was so violently massive that it actually shifted the Earth's figure axis.
That's the axis around which the Earth's mass is fundamentally balanced, right?
Exactly.
So we are talking about a spinning top getting smacked with such immense force that its fundamental wobble is physically altered in the vacuum of space.
That is the exact mechanical reality. Richard Gross, a geophysicist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, calculated that the shift in the Earth's mass distribution actually increased the planet's rotational speed.
It sped the entire planet up.
Yes. That single earthquake shortened the length of a day on Earth by 1.8 microseconds.
That's just wild.
The physical geometry and the temporal rhythm of our world were fundamentally, permanently altered. Now, classical physics gives us a very clean, mechanistic explanation for this.
Right. Immense tectonic pressure builds up over centuries. The friction reaches a breaking point, and the rock snaps. Energy is released. It's a closed thermodynamic loop.
But this is where Alexander Belov's work comes in, specifically his book, Crisis of the Online World. He throws a massive wrench into that closed loop.
Because he looks at the exact same NASA data, the exact same geophysical event, and he identifies a glaring discrepancy in the cause and effect timeline.
Exactly.
He caught a bizarre glitch in the official reports following that earthquake. Some of them were stating that the day had sped up by 140 milliseconds, not 1.8 microseconds. That's tens of thousands of times bigger than the official number. That is 14% of a second. It's a short blink, but it's human scale, not an infinitesimal fraction of time that is impossible to notice.
This is the number that made him realize that this wasn't just a geological event. It was a number that was intimately tied with human neurobiology. Belov introduces a variable that classical physics explicitly ignores.
Human consciousness.
Yes. He points out that the years immediately preceding 2011 were characterized by an unprecedented boiling buildup of global psychological and geopolitical unrest.
If you look at the timeline, we were deep in the throes of the Arab Spring.
Right. We had massive youth-led revolutions cascading across Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria.
There was a staggering volume of human emotion. Revolutionary fervor, profound systemic fear, economic terror from the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis.
And all of this collective tension was being shared and amplified instantaneously across the globe. Belov argues that measuring the rock is only half the equation.
It completely ignores the crushing psychological weight of billions of human minds locked in a state of synchronized chaos. So while the earthquake in Japan had a concrete, physical, lasting effect on the planet, there is another set of data from a completely different field of study, from the really weird world of consciousness research and internet theory, that suggests something much, much stranger happened that exact same day.
You are referring to the time glitch.
The time glitch. There is this theory we found in the sources, specifically looking at the work surrounding the 11.11 phenomenon, that suggests there was a time dilation, a literal stutter in reality. And it was not microseconds. It was a massive, measurable gap.
This is the 140 millisecond gap.
Yes. 140 milliseconds, a literal lag in the operating system of the planet. And do you know what else takes exactly 140 milliseconds?
It is the average human reaction time to a visual stimulus. Specifically, the exact time it takes for the human brain to register a viral image, to recognize a sudden pattern.
Exactly. It is the visual stutter. It is the exact amount of time it takes for you to see something terrifying on your phone and for your brain to go, oh my God. And the theory we are unpacking today suggests that this is not a coincidence at all. It suggests that the internet, this thing we are all hopelessly addicted to, has inadvertently turned the human race into a single planetary nervous system. And when we all panic at the very same time, the Earth actually feels it.
And it does not just feel it, the Earth reacts to it physically.
We are talking about a time glitch paradox. We are talking about machines that predicted the tragedy of September 11th 3 hours before it actually happened. We are talking about a mathematical kill switch embedded in the human calendar, the number 11.
And the core argument across these texts is that these anomalies, seeing 11.11 on your clock, feeling like time is randomly speeding up, the sudden increase in massive natural disasters, they are all symptoms of the exact same underlying mechanism. But mechanically, how does an emotional state cross the barrier into geophysical kinetic energy?
That's the huge question. It's a very attractive theory connecting human unrest to satellite telemetry. But what is the actual bridge?
Belov leans heavily into ancient Vedic philosophy to build that bridge. Specifically, he uses the concepts of Rita and Akrita.
Okay, let's break those down.
So Rita represents the fundamental cosmic law of order, truth, and harmony in the universe.
Groundedness.
Exactly. And Akrita is its inverse. It is the force of untruth, ungroundedness, and chaos. Belov poses a central, paradigm-shattering thesis here.
Hit me.
What if the ungrounded, highly charged emotional energy of billions of people operating in a state of akrita generates a literal frequency? And he asks whether that specific frequency of human chaos found a sympathetic acoustic resonance within the Earth's crust.
Wait, let me just process the magnitude of that. Are you saying, what if the earthquake didn't cause the panic?
Yes.
What if billions of people panicking at the exact same moment actually caused the earthquake?
That is exactly what he is suggesting, that the massive synchronized discharge of psychic tension into the global field literally disrupted the geophysical stability of the planet.
So human emotion isn't just an ethereal byproduct of brain chemistry.
No, it possesses literal mass, energy, and resonant frequency.
It is genuinely magnetic how this research connects ancient Vedic texts to modern tectonic shifts. But if we follow that logic, we have to look at the delivery mechanism. Because 100 years ago, if 1 million people were panicking over a war or a famine, they were panicking in relative isolation. The emotional energy was dispersed over time and geography.
But today, we have built a physical conduit for that energy.
We have constructed a planetary nervous system.
And this is vital to understand. When we talk about the internet, we usually conceptualize it as a cloud. Something invisible and weightless.
It's floating up there.
But the internet is literal, heavy, physical hardware. It is millions of miles of fiber optic cables trenched across ocean floors.
It's massive server farms in the desert, pulsing with gigawatts of electricity.
It is a dense array of low Earth orbit satellites blanketing the upper atmosphere. We have literally wrapped a continuous silicon layer around the Earth.
So humanity didn't just build a communication tool. We built an externalized nervous system for the planet itself.
And everyone listening are the biological neurons firing signals through this network.
Which brings us to the most critical number in this entire outline, the 140 millisecond window, the visual stutter, because that specific fraction of a second keeps surfacing in the neurobiological research. And it seems to be the linchpin for how this planetary glitch actually operates.
It all comes down to the absolute limits of human neurobiology. When a visual stimulus flashes in front of your eyes, a push notification, a breaking news banner, a violent image on your feed.
It takes your brain approximately 140 milliseconds to process that visual information.
Right, from the retina through the visual cortex to the amygdala and to formulate a physiological reaction. That 140 milliseconds is our absolute biological limit.
It is a physiological stutter in our processing speed. Think about how information flowed in the past. If something tragic happened across the world, humanity found out about it over days, weeks, or even months via ships and telegraphs. The emotional reaction of the human species was smeared out over a very long timeline.
But today, the network has eradicated time. The friction is completely gone. And this is where the architecture becomes incredibly dangerous. Because sitting on top of this physical silicon crust is the algorithm.
The great conductor.
And the algorithm is designed with one singular mandate: to maximize human engagement. To do that, it ensures that when a major geopolitical shock occurs, 2 billion people receive that digital shockwave at the exact same moment.
I want to use an analogy here so we can really picture this. Think of a giant ancient bronze bell hanging in the center of a city.
Okay.
If 1 billion people walk up to that bell and flick tiny pebbles at it randomly over the course of an entire year, you don't get a ring. You just get a dull scratching sound. The kinetic energy is completely dispersed.
It doesn't resonate.
Exactly. But what happens when the algorithm steps in as the conductor?
The algorithm synchronizes the throws. It ensures that 2 billion digital neurons fire across the Earth's silicon crust within the exact same 140 millisecond visual stutter.
2 billion people strike the bell simultaneously.
And a strike that's synchronized, that incredibly massive, creates a physical acoustic resonance, a vibration capable of cracking the planet.
That is the core hypothesis. You have an instantaneous, synchronized spike of terror, grief, or revolutionary chaos, perfectly localized, within a 140 millisecond biological window.
And it is transmitted through a planetary silicon nervous system.
It isn't just data anymore. It is a sudden, violent surge of electrical and emotional energy interfacing directly with the Earth's crust.
This is a perfect moment to take a breath and pull back to look at the massive picture we've just drawn.
Let's do a quick recap. We started with NASA measuring a 1.8 microsecond shortening of an Earth day due to an earthquake.
Right.
And we've traced that physical anomaly back to the realization that the smartphone in your hand right now connects your brain's 140 millisecond reaction time directly to the tectonic plates beneath our feet.
We are exploring the literal physics of human attention. But if human emotion operates as a physical force, capable of creating acoustic resonance in the Earth's crust, theory just isn't enough.
No, we need a smoking gun.
We need empirical data, rigorous statistical proof that human attention can alter physical reality at the foundational quantum level.
And we absolutely have that proof. Which brings us to one of the most rigorously studied, heavily debated, and deeply unsettling scientific endeavors of the late 20th century, the Global Consciousness Project.
And specifically, what happened on the morning of September 11th, 2001.
The GCP is the empirical smoking gun for this entire theory. Walk us through the history here, because it is vital.
The GCP was born out of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab.
Founded by Robert John, right?
Yes, the former dean of engineering at Princeton. They spent decades studying the interaction between human consciousness and highly sensitive physical devices. In 1998, Dr. Roger D. Nelson expanded this concept globally.
This is where it gets wild.
He created a synchronized network of 65 to 70 microelectronic random number generators, which the researchers affectionately dubbed eggs.
Okay, for anyone listening who hasn't dug into the architecture of a random number generator, or an RNG, let's break down why this specific machine is so important.
Please do.
An RNG isn't just a computer program picking numbers out of a hat, because software can't generate randomness by itself. It relies on actual quantum tunneling effects, subatomic particles passing through microscopic barriers.
It spits out ones and zeros about 200 times a second.
Because it operates on quantum mechanics, it should be the absolute gold standard of perfect, unpredictable randomness. It is the digital equivalent of pure white noise.
Exactly. If you graph the output of an RNG over time, it should look like what statisticians call a drunkard's walk.
Just aimless wandering.
Right. It just meanders aimlessly around a baseline of 50-50 probability. There should be zero structure. Now, Nelson placed these eggs all over the planet.
In universities, private labs.
Across Europe, the US, India, Fiji, Africa, all of these machines were synchronized to atomic clocks, continuously sending their quantum coin flips back to a central server in Princeton.
And the operating thesis here is just profound. If millions of human minds share a coherent, intensely emotional response to a global event, does that unified field of consciousness subtly order the quantum randomness of the physical environment?
In simple terms, do the machines stop being random when humanity starts paying attention?
Over 17 years, the GCP analyzed over 500 pre-registered global events. Things like the funeral of Princess Diana, massive global meditations, New Year's Eve celebrations.
But the data that emerged from September 11, 2001 completely shattered the scientific community's understanding of time and consciousness.
Because on that morning, human attention was synchronized globally to a degree that had perhaps never occurred in human history.
Thanks to the global rollout of 24-hour news networks, billions of people were simultaneously locked onto the exact same images.
Feeling an overwhelming synchronized wave of horror, shock, and ontological terror.
2 billion people striking the bell at the exact same 140 millisecond interval.
And the eggs felt it.
They did. When the researchers at Princeton analyzed the network's data using a metric called a Stouffer Z-score, which measures the collective deviation of all the nodes from their expected random behavior,
they found a massive spike in environmental coherence. The machines across the globe literally stopped being random.
The quantum coin flips began showing structure, alignment, and order, deviating from probability by odds of 1 trillion to 1.
But the most staggering revelation, the retrocausality shocker that still keeps physicists awake at night, is the actual timeline of that data.
This is the part of the research that makes reality feel incredibly thin.
If the machine spiked exactly when the planes hit, that would be telepathy, right? That would be the noosphere reacting to the event in real time.
Correct. That would be impressive enough to rewrite physics, but that is not what the data shows.
No. The data shows the massive deviation started way earlier.
Much earlier. The researchers noted that the statistical anomaly in the global RNG network, the exact moment the machines stopped producing white noise and started aligning into a structured pattern.
When did it start?
It began at exactly 05:45 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Which was hours before the first plane, Flight 11, ever struck the North Tower.
The global consciousness, operating through the quantum environment, seemingly anticipated the impending world-altering trauma before it ever entered conscious human awareness. Nearly 3 full hours before the event occurred in physical reality.
3 hours. The world was still asleep. New York was just waking up, brewing coffee. The terrorists were maybe just getting to the airport, walking through security. In relation to the whole of the population of the world, practically nobody knew. But the random number machines in Tokyo and London knew.
This is a phenomenon what researchers call retrocausality.
Retrocausality. That sounds like something straight out of a Christopher Nolan movie.
It implies a model where the future can directly affect the past.
Okay, stop right there. How is that even remotely possible? Classical physics says cause always comes before effect. I kick the ball moves. The ball does not roll away 3 hours before I decide to kick it.
In classical Newtonian physics, yes. But in quantum mechanics, time is not always so strictly linear. Nelson suggests that 9/11 was such a massive, unprecedented trauma for the global mind that the emotional shockwave rippled backwards through the dimension of time. The machines drawing back from randomness was that spike at 05:45 a.m.
That is terrifyingly cool. So the collective unconscious of humanity experienced the immense trauma in the future, and that scream echoed back to the present, and the machines just picked up the temporal static.
That is the working hypothesis. The global mind had a literal premonition.
I can completely understand the psychology of collective grief. But explain the physics of the RNG predicting it.
It's a leap.
Are we saying the machines possessed precognition? Or that the collective unconscious of humanity sends a temporal shockwave approaching from the future and altered the quantum tunneling of microchips in Fiji before the physical planes even hit the buildings? That is an astounding claim.
It is. Theoretical physicists frame this using the concept of a tsunami of time, or the drawback effect.
The drawback effect.
If you observe the ocean hours before a massive physical tsunami hits the shoreline, the water doesn't just sit still.
Right, it violently recedes.
It pulls back from the beach, exposing the ocean floor, creating a massive physical vacuum in anticipation of the impending kinetic wave.
So the trauma is so massive it casts a shadow backward in time.
Yes. Some models of quantum mechanics, particularly those dealing with retrocausality, suggest that a massive collective trauma in the future creates a temporal vacuum in the present.
The sheer density of the impending emotional shock ripples backward through the space-time continuum.
And the global consciousness detects that drawback. The subtle, invisible tension of that detection begins altering quantum probabilities before the physical event arrives.
But mechanically, how does this invisible knowledge actually travel? If I am asleep in my bed in London or making coffee in Tokyo, how is my localized brain connected to a quantum microchip in a lab in Princeton? There has to be a physical or electromagnetic medium.
To understand the medium, we have to look at the heavily debated, deeply fascinating science of morphic resonance.
Proposed by the British biologist Rupert Sheldrake.
Correct. Sheldrake fundamentally challenges the reductionist view of biology, the view which states that everything you are is contained entirely within the chemistry of your skull and your genes.
He proposes that the forms, developments, and behaviors of all living systems are shaped by morphogenetic fields.
Invisible, organizing, resonant fields that contain the collective memory and structure of an entire species. It's a field that connects all human minds across the space-time continuum, completely independent of physical proximity.
The way the sources break down Sheldrake's work, using the architecture of a television, is brilliant. I want to share this.
It's a great analogy.
Think about your brain and your DNA. Modern reductionist biology assumes your DNA is the TV program you're watching.
Right.
But Sheldrake argues your DNA is just the copper wires, the transistors, and the tuning dial inside the physical TV set. If you mutate a wire inside the TV, the picture on the screen gets distorted. But that doesn't mean the wires inside the TV created the picture.
The actual show, the consciousness, the form, the memory, is an invisible signal broadcast from an external source.
And every single human being is a biological antenna tuned to the exact same frequency.
It is a profound shift in perspective, because if consciousness isn't generated by the brain, but rather received by it, then humanity is a single interconnected receiver array.
So if a massive segment of that array is about to be hit by an overwhelming wave of ontological terror, the entire morphic field of humanity is violently disturbed.
This intense collective disturbance resonates deeply enough to physically order the quantum randomness of the GCP's eggs, and, as Belov suggests, deeply enough to alter the tectonic stability of the Earth itself.
Look, if your mind is officially reeling right now, you are exactly where you need to be.
Absolutely.
And if you want to keep exploring the absolute edges of human knowledge with us, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join our memberships. We pour through these dense, paradigm-shifting sources to give you the ultimate shortcut to being the most informed, deeply curious person in any room.
And you absolutely want to stay locked in right now, because we are about to reveal why all of these glitches, the earthquakes, the quantum anomalies, the global cataclysms, seem to be governed by a very specific, terrifying mathematical syntax.
We've established that human emotion operates as an interconnected morphic field, and that the internet provides a physical 140 millisecond delivery system for that field.
But to truly understand the glitch, we have to look at the code.
We have to examine the numerical architecture of reality, the number 11. Let's get into the math.
Because when you start pulling back the layers on the dates, the times, and the numbers surrounding these massive global events, it rapidly stops feeling like random coincidence.
It starts feeling like the execution of a binary program.
The recurrence of the number 11 in moments of profound global trauma is statistically staggering. Let's start with the conclusion of World War I, arguably the first truly global industrialized slaughter in human history.
The armistice that ended that unprecedented cataclysm was enacted on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month.
11/11 at 11:00. Then we move forward to the September 11 attacks. The date itself is 9/11. The first aircraft to strike the towers was Flight 11.
And the Twin Towers physically dominated the New York skyline as a massive geometric representation of the number 11. But the chronological math of that day goes even deeper.
September 11th is the 254th day of the calendar year.
If you add those digits 2 plus 5 plus 4, you get 11. And after September 11th passes, there are exactly 111 days remaining in the year.
And it continues into the 21st century. Look at the Madrid train bombings, one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in European history. They occurred on March 11th, 2004.
3/11.
A date which mathematically fell exactly 911 days after the September 11 attacks.
And then the geophysical anomaly, we started this deep dive with the earthquake in Japan that shifted the Earth's axis.
That occurred on March 11, 2011. 3/11.
How do we even begin to categorize this? To understand why reality seems to stutter around this specific integer, we have to look at the work of Marie D. Jones.
Specifically, her deep dive into numerological traditions in her book, 1111, The Time Prompt Phenomenon.
In ancient and modern numerology, 11 is not treated like other numbers. It is classified as a master number.
You don't reduce it to a single digit. It carries immense, ancient symbolic weight.
Traditionally, 11 represents spiritual awakening, heightened intuition, mass paradigm shifts, and the opening of portals.
When people recurringly see 1111 on their clocks, it is historically interpreted as a gateway. A threshold moment where the veil separating the dense physical world from the underlying psychological or spiritual world becomes incredibly thin. It really doesn't look like a coincidence that the most powerful digital network in history is rising now. We have entered the age of Aquarius, the 11th sign of the zodiac. Aquarius is the sign of the water bearer. But in our era, he isn't pouring water. He is pouring data into a global collective pool. 11 is the number of the network, the group mind, and the sudden seismic awakening. On the flip side, though, the number 11 also has a major negative occult significance. Our sources indicate that it is also used by secret societies to mark their influence on major world events. Because it is a portal, it's their signature and trigger point for influencing not just physical reality, but the metaphysical one as well. We've already mentioned the terror attacks, but another significant date was November 22nd, 1963. The date has 3 11s within it, 11, coupled with 11 plus 11, the assassination of JFK.
Wow, that's a big one. Some say nothing has been the same since. But to ground that metaphysical tradition in rigorous psychology and physics, we turn to Jungian synchronicity.
Carl Jung didn't develop this theory in a vacuum. He developed it through a deep, decades-long collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel laureate and one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics.
Jung defined synchronicity as a causal connecting principle. He argued that two events can coincide in a way that is deeply, symbolically, and meaningfully related without one event physically causing the other in a classical Newtonian sense.
From the Joan Pauli perspective, the number 11 isn't merely a digit used for counting. It is a binary syntax. It is a structural archetype embedded in the code of reality itself.
Think of it like this. Picture the date 11/11 or 9/11 or 3/11 as the massive, invisible magnifying glass suspended in the morphic field over the Earth.
I love that visual.
When the collective chaotic attention of 2 billion people focuses through the psychological lens of that specific archetypal number, it concentrates the psychic energy. It literally burns a hole in physical reality.
The number 11 acts as a focal point where internal psychological tension violently erupts into physical kinetic trauma.
Now, the skeptic will tell you, this is just the reticular activating system, the part of your brain that acts as a filter, training you to see what you're already looking for. But here's where I push back on the skeptics.
The reticular activating system is confined to the human skull.
Exactly. Confirmation bias explains why a person remembers seeing 11/11 on their microwave clock. But the RAS does not explain why a network of quantum random number generators, completely isolated in a laboratory environment, mathematically ceased being random hours before a global trauma occurred on the 11th day of the month.
Confirmation bias is a psychological filter. It does not manipulate the quantum tunneling of electrons in a microchip.
That is the ultimate threshold of the mystery. As Jung and Pauli proposed, when the collective human consciousness undergoes a massive foundational trauma, the physical universe itself seems to reflect that internal psychological state through highly meaningful coincidences.
The universe possesses an underlying interconnected architecture where numerical symbols act as visible markers for massive, invisible structural shifts in reality.
This is a lot of heavy foundational architecture we've just built. Let's synthesize the data before we move into the biological consequences.
Good idea.
We've established that human emotion does not exist in isolation. It operates as a shared planetary morphic field.
We've established that the physical infrastructure of the internet, driven by the algorithm, synchronizes that field into massive, hyper-concentrated 140 millisecond spikes of energy.
And we've seen the empirical data showing that these spikes manifest in physical reality, whether it's tectonic axis shifts or quantum probability anomalies, often organizing around the numerical archetype of 11.
We have mapped the mechanism of the glitch. We understand the delivery system, and we recognize the mathematical syntax of the code.
Which forces us to ask the most deeply personal question of this entire deep dive.
Yep.
What does this mean for our bodies?
If humanity possesses this immense, unrecognized causal power over the physical structure of reality, what happens to us biologically when we wield it unconsciously?
What happens when we pump pure fear into the system?
The biological and spiritual consequences are severe, and this brings us directly back to Alexander Belov's starkest warning.
Belov asserts that modern humanity is entirely disconnected from Rita, the cosmic law of order and harmony.
Instead, we are deeply steeped in what Vedic traditions call the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age of hypocrisy, conflict, and dense materialism.
Because we are trapped in this cycle, feeding the algorithm with our fear and outrage, Belov warns that we are not evolving. We are, in fact, experiencing involution.
We need to define involution based on the source material because it's a dense philosophical concept.
He is not suggesting a literal cartoonish regression where humans biologically morph back into primates.
No, involution is a profound spiritual and cognitive degradation. It is a loss of divine reason.
It's the theory that when we surrender to chaos, when we allow our minds to be hijacked by base material instincts and algorithmic fear, we devolve structurally.
Our higher cognitive and spiritual faculties atrophy. It is a mechanism of cyclic catastrophism.
Belov argues that when human consciousness stubbornly attaches itself to the chaotic, lowest frequencies of the material plane, we gradually lose our rational, harmonizing faculties.
It is a pre-cataclysmic symptom. But if our consciousness is degrading, if we are experiencing involution, we have to ask where this regression, or the potential for our actual evolution, is physically stored in the human body.
Right. If we are devolving, what is happening to our biology? Where is the hardware?
To find the hardware, we turn to the human genome. The sequencing of the human genome was one of the greatest scientific triumphs of our species.
The genome contains the equivalent of about 750 megabytes of digital information.
But the staggering discovery of the Human Genome Project and the subsequent ENCODE project was this. Only about 3% of our DNA actually codes for the proteins that build our physical bodies.
Those are the 22,000 or so genes that determine your eye color, your height, your physical traits.
For decades, mainstream evolutionary biology labeled the remaining 97% of our genetic sequence as junk DNA. They assumed it was evolutionary baggage, redundant code with no biological purpose.
But when you look at that 97% through the lens of information theory and metaphysics, it isn't junk at all. You don't build a supercomputer where 97% of the hard drive is utterly useless.
It's a dormant system. Marie D. Jones explores this deeply. That 97% non-coding DNA, the introns and regulatory sequences, is theorized to be a dormant cosmic antenna.
It is the unactivated biological hardware, waiting to be encoded with higher levels of conscious awareness, intuition, and paranormal manifestation.
It is the physical receiver for the morphic resonance we've been discussing. It is the biological interface for our evolution.
And this is where the architecture of the internet and our biology crash into each other in a terrifying way.
Instead of using our attention to activate that 97% for higher consciousness, for spiritual evolution, we are feeding it viral fear.
We are pumping absolute mental smog into our dormant DNA through our screens. We are relentlessly blasting our biological antennas with the lowest, most chaotic frequencies of the Kali Yuga.
We are flooding the planetary nervous system with endless 140 millisecond spikes of pure accreta.
Which culminates in Belov's ultimate warning, the planetary seizure.
If you look at the tectonic instability, the bizarre global weather anomalies, the inexplicable geopolitical spasms, They aren't just random, disconnected events.
They are the physical symptoms of a terrified global brain experiencing a grand mal seizure.
The Earth is convulsing because the emotional signals we are forcing through its digital nervous system are overwhelmingly toxic.
The Earth and humanity form a single, deeply entangled ecosystem. The observer and the observed cannot be separated.
If the morphic field is violently polluted with panic and chaos, the physical environment has no choice but to reflect that pollution through geophysical cataclysm.
But we aren't going to end this deep dive on a note of doom, because the source material provides a profound way out.
If we are the ones causing the glitch, we are the ones who can fix it.
We need to explore the solution, which revolves around my absolute favorite concept in this entire investigation: the causal observer.
To understand the immense power of the causal observer, we have to look at abstract realism, causal emergence, and the foundational bedrock of quantum mechanics, the double-slit experiment.
Let's break down the implications of the double-slit experiment, because it changes everything about how we view reality.
In this experiment, physicists fire subatomic particles, like electrons, at a barrier that has two tiny slits in it.
When the physicists are not looking, when there is no measurement or observation taking place, the electron acts like a wave of probability.
It mathematically goes through both slits at the exact same time, creating an interference pattern on the wall behind it.
But the instant a conscious observer measures or looks at the electron to see which slit it goes through, the wave function collapses.
The electron ceases to be a wave of infinite possibilities and acts like a solid classical particle going through only one slit.
The profound implication, highlighted by physicists like John Archibald Wheeler in his delayed choice thought experiments, is that the mere act of conscious observation retroactively determines the state of physical reality.
Abstract realism takes this a step further. It suggests that consciousness is not merely a passive byproduct of brain chemistry.
Consciousness is a fundamental, irreducible property of the universe that exerts actual, measurable causal mass over the physical world.
Theories like Jonjo McFadden's semi-conscious electromagnetic information field theory even propose that the brain's conscious electromagnetic field can physically push and pull neurons, dictating which ones fire and which ones remain dormant.
We all know the double-slit experiment shows observation collapses the wave function, but abstract realism reveals something much more empowering. Our minds are not just passive cameras sitting inside our skulls, helplessly recording a pre-existing world.
They are active projectors. Our conscious focus has literal causal freedom.
That is the ultimate solution. The bridging principle of consciousness dictates three absolute truths. There is always an observer. The observer always possesses the freedom of choice. And that choice always carries physical, causal consequences.
I want to bring this directly to you, listening right now. Every single time your phone vibrates with a breaking news alert, every time a horrific headline or a viral piece of outrage flashes across your screen,
you are standing at the absolute threshold of that 140 millisecond visual stutter. In that microscopic window of time, you are the causal observer.
In that fraction of a second, the algorithm is utilizing the planetary nervous system to try and strike the giant bell using your emotional kinetic energy.
It requires your fear to sustain the chaos of the Kali Yuga. But you have a choice.
In that 140 millisecond window, you can react with immediate, unconscious panic, outrage, or despair.
If you do, you add another electrical spark of toxic chaos to the planetary seizure. You contribute to the involution.
Or you can pause. You can take a breath.
You can choose to process the incoming data without allowing it to emotionally hijack your biology. By simply remaining grounded, you act as a stabilizing, harmonizing node on the global grid.
The final overarching message of all this research is profoundly empowering. You are the observer. Your biology is an antenna, and the Earth is actively listening to your morphic resonance.
Be incredibly, fiercely protective of what you choose to focus your attention on today, because you are an active participant in the physical creation of reality.
What an absolutely mind-bending journey. We started with NASA's telemetry on a physically shortened Earth day and traced it back to Alexander Belov's warnings of Vedic chaos.
We mapped the literal digital nervous system wrapped around our planet. We examined the terrifying retrocausal predictive power of quantum random number generators on September 11th.
And we decoded the 11.11 numerical matrix that seems to govern our reality.
We even looked into the dark matter of our own junk DNA to realize that we are actively holding the steering wheel of the Earth's geophysical stability.
We've spent this entire time dissecting the risks. We've explored how 140 milliseconds of synchronized algorithmic fear can literally crack the Earth's crust and collapse quantum probability.
But I want to leave you with a completely different thought, an inversion of the entire equation for you to mull over.
What if the algorithm, or the network, was utilized differently? What if we could synchronize 2 billion human minds in a single 140 millisecond window of profound, intentional gratitude or pure, unadulterated joy?
If our collective, synchronized fear possesses enough causal mass to trigger a planetary seizure, could we literally terraform the planet, stabilize the tectonic plates, and heal the physical world with a single, synchronized frequency of human joy?
That is the golden age, the ultimate evolution of the causal observer.
That's something to sit with the next time you happen to glance at the clock and see 11:11 staring back at you. Or the next time your phone buzzes in your pocket. You hold the causal power. Thanks for taking this incredible deep dive with us. Stay curious, stay grounded, and we'll see you in the next one.